Let's now consider how to configure devices that are managed by Intune. We'll do this using profiles and policies. Profiles can be created for devices, whilst policies can be created for both devices and apps. Device configuration profiles are used to configure settings and features on devices. These can be used to pre-configure setup for corporate resources, such as configuring a Wi-Fi or VPN profile on your mobile devices. In this way, they can be automatically connected to your corporate Wi-Fi throughout your organization. Profiles are specific to the device platform, such as iPhones or Windows 10 desktops. Some examples of profiles available within Intune include device restrictions, delivery optimization, identity protection, and email profiles. Some platforms have similar profiles, but often a setting will not be available across all platforms. Let's take a look at the functionality offered by the different device configuration profiles available. I've opened the Microsoft 365 Device Management Admin Center, and I'll select Device Configuration from the favorites. Under Manage, I'll select Profiles. And here we can see several profiles that have been created already. If I select Create Profile, I'll enter a name. And then select Platform, and here we can see the different platforms that we can create device configuration profiles for. If I select iOS, I then can choose the different types of profile. If I select Windows 10 and later, notice that there are more profile types available. I'll select Device Restrictions, and that exposes all the different settings available. If this is the first time you've seen Microsoft Intune, you'll be surprised at the number of settings and categories available. And this is relating to just one profile type. I can configure delivery optimization. And some of these settings will be familiar to you if you've used the settings on a Windows 10 device. Within Identity Protection, we can configure Windows Hello for Business, which then exposes all the various settings that we can configure. The Endpoint Protection profile allows us to configure many of the Windows Defender features. Here we can see the Windows encryption features that we can configure, including BitLocker. In this regard, we will not be able to configure BitLocker on iOS or Android devices, which reinforces why the profile types are very specific to the platform. You'll notice that there are many more profile settings available for Windows 10 devices. This is because Windows 10 can be fully managed by Microsoft Intune. We can also configure custom settings using the OMA URI settings, which are applicable to all MDM solutions. Let's now review the functionality and protection offered by Intune policies. Intune provides built-in policies that you can configure and deploy to your enrolled devices. The built-in policies includes hundreds of device settings for different platforms such as Windows, Android, and iOS. And because the various platforms offer different functionality, one generic policy for all platforms cannot be used. Therefore, you'll need to create policies for each different device platform that you use in your organization. The device compliance policies allow you to protect data by ensuring that devices meet your organization's security requirements. For example, you might want to enforce mandatory password access on devices or require device encryption. Only users who use compliant devices will be granted access to your corporate resources and data. Let's drop into our demo tenant and see how to configure an Intune device compliance policy. In a Microsoft 365 device management, I'll select Device Compliance on the left under Favorites, and then select Policies. And here we can see the list of policies that have already been created to create a new policy. I'll select Create Policy. I'll then provide a name and description for the new policy. I'll then select the platform. I want Windows 10 and later, and here we can now see the relevant settings available for Windows 10 device. I'll navigate through each category to configure their settings I want for my policy. Our sales team have Surface devices, therefore I can require BitLocker, secure boot, and code integrity, and click OK. I'll then select device properties. I could modify the minimum and maximum OS versions, review the Compliance Manager settings, and the security settings. Here we can configure the password settings to unlock a mobile device, block or allow simple passwords, force alphanumeric passwords to be used, and define the minimum password length. I'll force encryption, require a firewall, and the TPM or Trusted Platform module require antivirus and anti-spyware on the device, and require that the machine uses the built-in Microsoft Defender anti-malware solution. If you use Microsoft Defender ADP, you can also configure the machine risk score. Once I'm satisfied, I'll click OK, and then confirm the actions for non-compliance. This could mark the device as non-compliant, or we can configure an email to be sent to the user. I'll select an email template I configured earlier, which will direct the user to seek assistance from the IT help desk. And then click OK. I'll now create the policy. The policy is created, and we can see it listed in the list of policies. Before the policy can take effect, we must assign the policy to the users or devices. We can see currently the policy is not assigned. To have the policy be effective, we need to assign it to users or devices. I'll select the policy, and then click Assignments. I'll include the groups that I wish this policy to be assigned to. I want the policy to be assigned to my sales team. And click Select. And then click Save. Here we can see by clicking the Evaluate that one device in my sales team will be impacted. And we can see in the list of policies that the policy has been assigned. You can use app configuration policies to customize applications on devices. For example, some apps require configuration before they'll run, such as requiring a port number or language settings to be configured. App protection policies protect data held within apps against loss, corruption, leaks, and theft. There are two types of settings available: data location settings, where access may be granted or restricted depending on the location of a user and the device. For example, you can block access to a highly sensitive app unless the user is located within the head office and access settings, such as needing a PIN in order to access the application on the device. Intune also allows us to use conditional access to control the granting of access for users, devices, or apps. Conditional access policies use conditions and controls. Conditions include checks, such as the location of the device or whether a specific app is being used. Controls define what access will be granted once the condition status for a device has been reported, such as to block access or grant access. Conditional access is not actually part of Intune. Its functionality provided within Azure Active Directory and requires an Azure AD Premium license. Let's provide an example of how conditional access policies work. You create a device compliance policy to check whether a device is located at a user's home or head office location and wants to use the corporate finance app on an enrolled device. When the user tries to access the resource, the status from this policy is evaluated by Azure Active Directory. Azure AD then passes this status back to the conditional access policy, which can then either grant or block access for the device based on the conditions being met. When creating profiles and policies within Intune, it's best to ensure that you're only managing settings with one specific policy. However, sometimes policy conflicts can occur. This could be due to conflicts between Intune policies used to manage your cloud environment or between Intune cloud-based policies and group policy that you're using in a hybrid environment. Let's first look at managing Intune policy conflicts in a cloud-only environment. Intune policies are cloud-based and managed using the Intune portal. When a device connects to Intune via the internet, policies are deployed to that device. We need to understand how policies are applied so that you can attempt to resolve any issues. A useful rule is that compliance policy settings always take precedence over configuration policy settings. I always remember this by thinking compliance is stronger than configuration, and for conflicts within the same type of policy, the most restrictive policy setting will be applied. And finally, if multiple configuration policies conflict, you'll see a warning of this in the Intune Admin Center, and you must then manually resolve the conflicts. Let's now consider how to manage Intune and group policy conflicts within a hybrid environment. First, let's review how group policies work. Group policy can be used to implement specific configurations for users and devices. Configurations created with group policy are known as group policy objects or GPOs. GPOs are applied in a hierarchical manner, and devices will typically receive multiple GPOs within an organization. GPOs can affect the device or the user, and they're applied when a device is turned on and when a user logs onto the device. GPOs can be applied locally on individual machines or centrally managed and applied to multiple machines that are logically grouped together. In a co-managed or hybrid system, you'll need to manage both group policies and Intune policies across your devices. Some devices may even receive both types of policy, and you'll need to make sure that there are no overlapping conflicts. Bear in mind that Intune can configure a number of the same settings as group policy, for example settings such as Windows Firewall or the Edge browser settings in Windows 10. The term precedence dictates which rules and settings have priority over other rules and settings. For example, if you configure a setting using group policy and then also configure the same setting using Intune policies, which configuration will be implemented? You'll need to take into account precedence when co-managing devices and apps. Let's look at how group policies and Intune policies work together. What happens when there are conflicts between Intune policies and group policy objects in a co-managed environment? Group policy objects used to take precedence over Intune policies. However, since Windows 10 version 1803, you can now choose which management solution will take precedence, with a new setting called Control Policy Conflict. In a hybrid environment, you can manage any policy conflicts in either the group policy or the Intune Admin Center. For example, you can use a security filter option in the group policy console to ensure that you can only apply group policy settings to those devices not managed by Intune. We can also check for and resolve Intune policy conflicts within the Intune admin portal. There are also several group policy-related tools, such as GP Result, which will determine which group policy object settings are being applied to the local or remote PC. When troubleshooting, you should look to isolate devices by moving the ones managed by Intune to a different organizational unit or OU, which does not have group policy settings applied. 1420. And finally, you could consider blocking group policy inheritance on OUs that contain devices enrolled in Intune.